Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
As we enter the middle of August, the tropics remain quiet for now. Of course, the peak of hurricane season still ahead, and we will be tracking anything that could possibly develop here on Tracking the Tropics. This is another episode on Tracking the Tropics this week. Just because it is quiet out there doesn't mean we don't have anything to talk about. We actually have a whole host of things to talk about this week, including why it is possibly so quiet this week, and a look at NOAA's forecast. They are going to be updating their forecast, their seasonal forecast, heading into the peak of hurricane season. Rebecca, we're going to be talking about how hot it is outside, and our main topic of the day is going to be talking about where the tropical storm names come from on this episode. So I'm your host, meteorologist Amanda Hawley, here in the WFLA Now Stream Center, of course, joined by meteorologist Rebecca Berry.
Hi there.
And we will be joined eventually by KXAN's meteorologist Kristen Curry. It looks like she just dropped off stream there. So we will try and get her back as soon as possible. But for now, I'm going to send it on over to Rebecca. She's going to talk a little bit about why we are quiet right now and what we are going to be watching here over the next week or so.
Yes, and so what we're seeing right now is an extremely quiet Atlantic, and that is pretty typical for July and even June. We usually don't see much in the Atlantic. It's really as we head into this month that things start to ramp up in August across the Atlantic. But what we're seeing right now, nothing's spinning, nothing looks really good. Even the GFS is having a hard time putting those typical 10 to 14 day out GFS storms going on. And what we're seeing out there is lots of shear, of course. We've still got those warm sea surface temperatures, but we're just not seeing the big, robust thunderstorms roll off the coastline of Africa and start spinning, which we do expect that to happen eventually as we move forward this month. But right now, things are just looking exceptionally quiet, which we really, really love. Now, we expect the activity in the Atlantic to peak in the middle of September. Just look at this graph right here. You can see how quiet we normally see things in June and July, which, of course, we had a very quiet June and July. Even the storms that they did name, they were almost of no consequence, either fish storms or very short-lived, a hurricane for a day, that sort of a thing. And so 61% of all storms form in August and September, and then it really drops off in October once those sea surface temperatures start to cool down just a little bit. So that is good news for what we've been through. Unfortunately, that does mean that we'll probably see the activity picking up regardless of factors that we have working for or against the tropical season. We've been dealing with very late season Saharan dust. Saharan dust was slow to start, and it's been slow to finish as well. We're still getting nice thick plumes of Saharan dust, even as far to the west as the Gulf. You can even discern it on the Saharan dust forecast moving into the next couple of days. We continue to see these large areas of the Saharan dust make their way across the Atlantic. And we love Saharan dust here on Tracking the Tropics. Now, we know that it's not the Saharan dust itself that kills tropical activity or keeps us slow, but it is everything that works into the fact that we can have the atmosphere would allow the Saharan dust to move out across the Atlantic. How dry it is, those stronger winds in the higher levels of the atmosphere. And so just really, really great things working for us in terms of keeping things quiet between El Nino and the fact that we still have Saharan dust in August. I feel like that's almost unheard of, Amanda, to have Saharan dust this late. We, of course, have those warm sea surface temperatures. We've had record-breaking heat on land across the country, and that continues through this week. And unfortunately, that means warm sea surface temperatures as well.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the hot temperatures really across the country, but we've been talking about the warm sea surface temperatures, especially down in South Florida, with some of the coral bleaching that's going on down in the Keys. And obviously, we're keeping an eye on those sea surface temperatures out in the Atlantic, because that is where most of those storms form right now during the month of August, and they can pick up some of that fuel. It's also hot out in Texas, which is where our featured meteorologist comes from today, KXAN meteorologist Kristen Curry, who we had a little bit of a technical issue at the beginning there, but she is with us now. So thanks for joining us today, Kristen.
Yeah, good morning from Texas. Good afternoon to those in Florida and everybody watching. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, so we were talking before the stream started about how hot it's been for you guys. It's just hot everywhere. We're talking about hot sea surface temperatures, hot actual temperatures. Feels like temperatures are hot. We have an excessive heat warning in effect locally in the Tampa Bay area today. All a factor, heading into the next couple of months.
Absolutely. And misery loves company, right? We too are underneath that excessive heat warning here in Austin, Texas. I mean, we do hot here in Texas, but this has been historically hot. Unfortunately for us, we have seen and we're continuing to see record-breaking temperatures. I mean, almost daily, we're coming within 1 to 2 degrees of breaking high temperatures. And right now here in Austin, this is the longest heat wave we've ever seen in our city's recorded history, going back to the 1890s. We've had 32 straight days of triple-digit heat here in Austin. So it's hot in the Gulf. It's hot here in Central Texas. We know it's hot in the Atlantic too. That definitely seems to be the word of the summer.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Luckily, we haven't had a ton of storms form just yet. We have had 4 named storms, 1 unnamed storm in January. So technically 5 total storms for the entire year here. But we've got the busiest months ahead. This is a look at the August development zones, and we really zoom out now because we start to watch those tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa. We've seen several waves try and make it off the coast. Luckily, a lot of them, Rebecca, have been kind of squashed by a lot of that dry air, some of that dust, and they really haven't been able to take advantage of those warm waters just yet. So we haven't had any of the names so far, at least past the 4.
Yes, and so it does feel like it's been kind of a quiet start to the season in terms of the storms that have been named. They've either been really, really short-lived or they've been of no consequence, a fish storm like Don was. Even though it was the first hurricane of the season, it was only a hurricane for a day and it made 2 giant loops in the middle of the Atlantic and dissipated. That's my favorite kind of storm.
All of our favorite kinds of storms. So what we really wanted to talk about today on Tracking the Tropics is, where do the tropical storm names come from? At the beginning of every season, we share the list of names. Some of them are new, some of them are reused. Well, the World Meteorological Organization is who actually picks these names. They've changed a little bit over the years, but now we have a set list of names that gets reused. We have 6 lists of names that gets reused, and on the 7th year, we restart that list over again. And the only reason we pick a new name is if a storm is so strong or deadly or costly, it would be kind of offensive to reuse that name. We would never want to call, a Hurricane Katrina again, because we wouldn't want to experience something like that again, even if it was a weak storm. So names do get retired, and then the World Meteorological Organization actually chooses a new name from a bank of names that they have already picked. And it actually is regional dependent, Kristen. So our list of names here in the Atlantic, we have English names, we have American names, and we have Spanish names for our list that we reuse as well.
Absolutely. And I think something super interesting about this is kind of even going way back centuries ago. You know, they were initially named after saints, right? And then as we get a little bit into the 19th century, it was just female names. And I love that it's all a female group of meteorologists today, because how perfect, right? It was just female names. And then eventually the Southern Hemisphere started to implement those male names. And now, as we see here in both the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific Basin, we rotate those female and male names. And every year the World Meteorological Organization puts out a pronouncer too, because some of them can get pretty tricky there. Those I names and getting into yeah, exactly, the end of the alphabet, right? But we do this for organization. We do this for more efficient messaging. It's just an easier way for not only broadcast meteorologists, but meteorologists across the entire United States, and even shipping vessels out there to easily interact, communicate that weather information in a concise way.
Yeah, I think, it's really interesting when we look at the lists of names to see which ones are the original names and which ones have been changed over the years because they have been retired. So we'll take a look at that. And I do want to remind you, this is an interactive stream here on Tracking the Tropics. We take your questions from our social media sites. So you can use the hashtag #HeyAmanda, #HeyRebecca, or hashtag #HeyKristen. And we can pop up your question on screen and answer it in real time for you. So if you have any questions about the names, we'd love to hear those. If you have any questions about the hot weather that we're experiencing as well. And we're also going to be talking about how NOAA is going to be updating their hurricane forecast tomorrow. Well, at the end of our stream here, we'll talk a little bit about what we expect them to say coming up here in just a few minutes. So, Rebecca, I think that this is really interesting. 75 of the original 132 names are still in use. Those names were this list of names, the original names came up in 1979, and 75 of them are still original. But that means we have a lot that have been retired and new names are on the list.
Yeah, so a little less than half have been retired. And so the scale is for deadly or particularly damaging and costly hurricanes is what they use to retire those names. And so when we're taking a look at list number one, which was Arlene, Brett, Cindy, Don, that's the one we're using. So Don has been replaced in 2005.
Most recently in 2005 as well, right? Because we do know that the I name in particular has been retired more than any other letter in the alphabet.
And that makes sense with the peak of the season being in September and August, that you would be about that way through down to the I name when the storms would really start to crank up.
Yeah, so in this list, this is a zoomed in list. I know the names are kind of hard to read on the full graphic there, but the blue shades that you see, those are all original names. So Arlene, Brett, and Cindy, those were all original names set back in 1979 by the World Meteorological Organization. And again, as you mentioned, Kristen, they do go male, female, or female, male, female. They rotate there, and it didn't always used to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting to see, how many, as you said, these repeat every 6 years. So this list would repeat again in 2029. It would be if we don't have any retired names. And I do know, the World Meteorological Organization, they do take that very seriously. They'll meet and they'll go over which names will they retire. Last year it was Ian and Fiona, I believe. So those are no longer ever going to be showing up on a list. And rightfully so, as you mentioned, it kind of speaks to the sensitivity to those who were so devastated by that hurricane, both Ian and Fiona last year.
So we will hope for no retired names this year, but it is always possible. Of course, we're entering the peak of hurricane season now. So we have been through Dawn. Next will be Emily, which is also an original name. And luckily, we're not tracking any possible development out there right now, but we will get that update from NOAA tomorrow. So every year, Colorado State University and NOAA puts out their forecast before the season, and then periodically throughout the season, they update it. And originally, their season forecast was for about an average season. So NOAA was calling for 12 to 17 named storms, 5 to 9 hurricanes, and then 1 to 4 major hurricanes. Colorado State updated their forecast most recently last week. They're currently calling for total 18 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. We've had 4 so far, 4 named storms and 1 hurricane so far. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on what NOAA will do with their forecast for the rest of the season that they'll put out tomorrow?
I think they're probably going to keep it pretty close to what they've done. I don't anticipate a huge change because of the fact that I think we'll see a lot of my theory on this season is because of the increase in shear that's battling out against that warm sea surface, those warm sea surface temperatures, is that we're going to get a lot of storms forming outside of our typical development regions further north than where that shear is. And so I think we're going to get a ton of named fish storms that don't really have any consequence on the U.S., which is great. I'm worried about some spin-up storms in the Gulf where we would have a very short amount of time to get from when that system formed to when it made an impact on the coastline. That's my big concern for this season. But in terms of those overall numbers, I think we're still, even though it feels like a slow start to the season, I think we're still on track to be within that range. But I do think a lot of those are going to be storms that we never remember because they never had any consequence.
Kristen, your thoughts on their forecast update tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be surprised if it, has any major wiggles. I assume they would probably sit close to. It is interesting, here in Texas, because we're kind of squashed in the middle, not only do we watch what's going on in the Atlantic, we also kind of have to keep our eyes out west because sometimes we can get some of the influence from remnants of Pacific hurricanes as well. And given the El Nino that we've typically seen some of our worst floods here in Central Texas from Pacific remnant hurricanes in the fall. So we obviously would never wish for anything like that, but we've been so dry and so hot that you almost, if things were perfect, kind of keep your fingers crossed for a messy tropical depression that on a very weak side, but the Gulf is so warm. it almost seems impossible for anything to stay weak, right? They would just eat up those warm waters that we've got in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's something we really have to watch, because like Rebecca said, these things can go quick. And whether it's the Texas coast or, our friends out in Southwest Louisiana, I remember being on the ground covering Hurricane Delta in 2020. I was just 6 weeks after Hurricane Laura, and it was devastation everywhere. And so, all it takes is one, and that recovery is years in the process. So we just can't afford to have another storm like Hurricane Laura or Ida. So we hope everything kind of stays out of the Gulf and like Rebecca said, maybe pop up a little outside the development region in the Atlantic and then get torn apart by that wind shear.
Yeah, that's what we're continuing to see happen. El Nino continues to develop, which is good news because that counteracts those warm sea surface temperatures. So I agree. I don't think that NOAA's going to make any big changes to their forecast tomorrow because we haven't seen a big sway one way or the other with these competing factors that we've talked about on every single episode of Tracking the Tropics this year. That strong El Nino leads to fewer storms because of that wind shear, but those record warm sea surface temperatures. One thing that the tropical systems do, and it's good, they do redistribute the heat, right? So they take the heat from the ocean, they use it as fuel, but then they redistribute that heat up north. So if there's one good thing about a tropical system that would come through, it would cool those waters off even in the Gulf of Mexico or out in the Atlantic. But luckily, we're not tracking anything right now that would do that. So we are going to keep tracking the heat in terms of the water temperatures as well as the heat in the air. We do have one question coming in right now. Richard Ayala on WFLA's Facebook page coming in, hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Kristen. How long is the heat advisory going to be in effect in Tampa? And I'll take this one, Kristen. We do have both a heat advisory and an excessive heat warning in effect for parts of the Bay Area. Here in the Tampa Bay area, the heat advisory is in effect until 7 p.m. as well as the excessive heat warning. The heat advisory was actually upgraded just before 11 o'clock this morning because of our feels like temperatures. They were supposed to be even hotter than we originally were thinking. So the National Weather Service did upgrade that. That means our feels like temperatures, which they're already there, and they're going to stay there now through the 7 o'clock hour tonight, between 107 and 115. 115 degrees is what it's feeling like. Now, Kristen, out in Texas, you guys have been dealing with the actual temperatures in the triple digits, which is on a whole nother level.
Absolutely. Today would be day 33 in a row for us here in Austin of seeing that high temperature above 100. We've had our, bouts of humidity that brings that feels like temperature up to 112, 113. We too have that mix of excessive heat warnings and heat advisories. And that's something kind of unique to here in Texas, we watch for, especially in central Texas. If we do get a hurricane or a tropical system in the Gulf and it doesn't go towards Texas or mainly shifts a little further east towards Louisiana, if that makes landfall, we can see temperatures spike even further, being on the western edge of a hurricane or a tropical storm. And there's a lot of parallels right now between what we are experiencing now, what we had back in 2011. And in 2011, I believe it was a tropical system, maybe Rita, that came through and gave us some atrocious winds and really hot temperatures as that came in around Southwest Louisiana. So that is the last thing we need, is even more heat brought on by a tropical system, because we've been praying for rain. We've been doing the rain dances. We've been doing anything we can to get rid of this drought and rid of this heat. But unfortunately, nothing has been working.
Yeah, and Rebecca, you have been tracking the past couple of days here, the record heat as well. We've been very close to those records. Temperatures are above average. The feels like temperatures are really high as well. But the actual temperatures for us, we've been nearing records as well.
Yes, so yesterday in Tampa at the airport, we tied our high temperature record of 96 degrees. And the interesting conversation that we were having on the anchor desk yesterday is Tampa at the airport's never hit 100 degrees. And that's because of the sea breeze, basically, because if it does get that hot, that's going to drive an even stronger sea breeze towards that more coastal temperature sensor. But we were talking, if there is a year that we're going to hit 100, it could be this year. It certainly felt like it with those 115, 120 degree feels like temperatures in some of those locations. We have one temperature sensor. It's on Davis Islands. It's right there by the airport. So the humidity is incredibly high because it's on the water. And also, I'm sure you're getting a little bit of an urban heat island effect from the concrete of the airport. But yesterday, for several hours, the feels like temperature at that particular sensor read 125 degrees.
Wow.
Ooh.
It's rough out there, folks. So on top of everything, make sure, we say it every day, right? We just reiterated it. We sound like a broken record at this point, but you have to stay hydrated. If you start to feel weak or get, headaches, if you're outside for long periods of time and you're just not feeling yourself, take a break, go in the shade, go in the AC, drink some extra water, drink the electrolytes, because that's the big story right now across the area.
They're worried about back to school with all the kids' practices.
Absolutely.
Because they're just going to be starting to get back into football and track and that sort of a thing.
Well, even just walking home from the bus stop. I mean, some kids have quite a far walk. And if you're outside, even for 5 minutes, you're just drenched in sweat, and it's hard to recover from that. So something that we will continue to track here over the next few weeks, especially with school starting. Kristen, you're in Texas there. Is school starting for you guys soon as well?
It is, yeah. Not only that, we've got kiddos going back to school this week as well as next week. And Amanda, we were kind of talking before the stream started. Unfortunately, our wildfire risk is starting to catch up with us because of the lack of rainfall and the heat. Just yesterday, we had a 50-acre fire go up right here in the metro, and unfortunately burned down an apartment building and displaced 24 households. So this is something that isn't out of the ordinary here in Texas. We're used to wildfires, but because of our fuel, because of our grasses and our shrubs, we don't obviously in Texas have the big old pines and the timbers or anything, but these wildfires move so fast that it leaves very limited time for evacuation notices to go out, which is really scary for us. So with the heat, the ongoing drought, and the wildfires. I mean, I'm sure y'all have seen some of the video out of Hawaii too, of them dealing with the wildfires, some of the winds fueled by Hurricane Dora. I mean, it's that time of year, but no matter what, it's always scary.
Yeah. And, it seems like no matter where you look, there's something to talk about in the weather, what's going on right now. We're not talking a lot about tropical systems here, but yeah, we're still talking about Saharan dust. We're talking about hot air and water temperatures. We're talking about El Nino, we're talking about the wildfires. So, something going on, certainly, for sure. It's all obviously connected. We always talk about the atmosphere being a fluid, which it's really interesting when you look at, the clouds from above and the Saharan dust as it travels across the ocean. It's definitely fluid-like, right? And everything kind of merges together there. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to do it for us today on this episode of Tracking the Tropics. Kristen, I'll just get one last thought from you on what you're going to be looking for, the season ahead, the next couple of months, what you anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely. All we're kind of talking about right now here in Texas is El Nino, right? When is El Nino going to take hold? When can we get some of those cooler and wetter conditions? And we know El Nino typically has a stronger influence on our Texas weather pattern, more so in the winter. So we're really keeping our fingers crossed that we can catch up on some of that rainfall, because if it doesn't come in the winter, we're going to run into some problems. But there is a little bit of our climatology that speaks to landfalling tropical systems. That's where we pick up, especially here in Central Texas, some of that leftover rainfall. Sometimes it comes too much, like what we had in Hurricane Harvey. Sometimes we just get clipped by systems like Tropical Storm Beta we had in 2020. But we're hopeful that we're not seeing any of the Ians and the Fionas we had last year, but maybe a little bit of some of that moisture can come through the Gulf and bring us some relief in Texas, because until then, it's just going to be more triple-digit heat and more of this worsening drought that's not only affecting us here in Austin, but a good chunk of Texas.
And Rebecca, I'll send it your way. Can you kind of continue off of that for our area heading into, the fall and winter and spring months? For El Nino for us also means a little bit busier of a season. We like El Nino for tropics, but not necessarily for our spring weather season.
No, unfortunately, with those stronger upper level winds and some of the other effects that we see from El Nino locally, we do get those more powerful cold fronts pushing a little bit further south and really enhancing what we call as our severe weather season, when those stronger fronts, then possible tornadoes, start to sweep across the southeast and eventually make their way towards Tampa. Those fronts pick up a lot of speed when they're out over the Gulf with that lack of friction, and then they slam into our coastline, and that addition of the friction of it moving over land can really cause those spin-up tornadoes.
So lots to talk about here on Tracking the Tropics today. It may be quiet out in the tropics, but there's still a plethora of things to discuss. We definitely covered multiple topics today, and I want to give a huge shout out to Kristen, our featured meteorologist from KXAN there in Austin, Texas. Thanks for joining us today, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks for having me, ladies. I appreciate it.
And thanks, obviously, always to Rebecca as well, joining us here on Tracking the Tropics. You can always rewatch this episode. Again, we covered a lot on trackingthetropics.tv. You can also listen to every single episode from this season on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts from. So don't forget about that. For today's episode, we're going to wrap this up. Of course, we'll be live again next week at 12:30 on Wednesday, or of course before then if we need to talk about something, but hopefully things will continue to stay quiet. Until then, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.